InfoSec World 2018 Keynote. Are we there yet? Getting there is only half the trip. Delivered by Amelie Aaron Karan, Deputy CIO of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Office of the Inspector General. This presentation was prepared or accomplished by Amelie Aaron Karan in her personal capacity. The opinions expressed in this talk are the author's own and do not reflect the view of the Office of the Inspector General, the Department of Health and Human Services, or the United States government. So these were my first computers, as I'm sure many of yours were these or variations thereof. The reason I had to was divorced parents. Then again, why not milk it a little, especially for a computer geek in training? The former died a horrible death while plugged into the wall of our farmhouse when a horrible rainstorm blew through, and being an old farmhouse, when the lights flickered, so did my little Timex Sinclair, slowly out of existence. The latter, my Commodore 64, courtesy of my father and actually his until we got a kit-built 8088 from Jade Computer in the late 80s, became my main source of geeking out. I learned how to load programs, play some basic games, and messed around with Logo. And I always wondered what that little CPM cartridge was supposed to do. This was also the first computer to get me online. Well, as much as the late 80s or early 90s BBS would allow for. I found games, desktop publishing tools, chat rooms, and loads text files about various topics and a host of other digital goodies. I was the only kid in school to deliver typeset writing assignments and biology dissection reports with my own rather distorted view on them. Computers and their burgeoning networks were a creative outlet for a kid like me. Creativity also begets curiosity, and I think, for many of mine and earlier generations, we were the ones too, in the absence of computers, busy being free-range kids outside, climbing trees, playing in dirt piles, playing in the street, and walking through creeks and just exploring. Say, given an old disused clock, I would spend time taking that apart and hoping to reassemble it with no remaining loose parts. When computers actually did show up, either as a home computer or in school or in another academic or work environment, I took to exploring our own curiosity there as well. Where was this actually going to take us? Well, up until the late 1980s and early 1990s, there wasn't much depth about teaching computing in many schools unless you were in a typing class or a programming class. Woohoo, yay Pascal and Fortran. Or found your way into a talented and gifted class, in which the school systems I was in was called special activities. Now, kids are nearly born knowing how to use a smartphone or tablet, and in fact, Apple's own iPad commercial makes light of the fact that they aren't thought of computers anymore. So this is where we find ourselves now. Life has a way of resulting in ever-changing directions. Set your mind to do one thing and end up somewhere else entirely. Other times we feel like we may just be chasing our tail, especially in our careers and even more so in security, where every day brings some new vulnerability, attacker, threat, technology, and some other must-have on the radar piece of knowledge that we must become immediate experts on for fear of falling behind. Before the Federal Information Security Management Act, known as FISMA, section of the E-Government Act of 2002, as well as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of the same vintage, the act of protecting computer networks was almost merely voluntary and relied upon astute leadership, along with techies who gave a damn, to handle these activities. Since these pieces of legislation in the GLBA, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, the IT portion of doing business in both the private and public sectors in the U.S. had become under greater scrutiny. This was the start of the great uptick of awareness of security as a possible career, outside of the DoD and other corners of society and business, for many rather than just a pastime or one of many hats a server or network admin was expected to wear. Many joked at the time that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was really Full Employment for Auditors Act, which dropped many a neophyte into unfamiliar environments. These involved highly technical piles of data and complex architectures as well. All the while, the companies themselves are being poked and prodded by vendors and their own boards to do something to respond to those same audits and develop enough protections to keep the latest phish, spam, ion-borne virus, and any other worm or DDoS attack that happens to be pointed in their direction. So given this, we must move faster. There's plenty of intel, tools, techniques to try to address our threats and assist in managing our own risk. The challenge is trying to decide what's prudent. We're constantly being either sidelined as the cost center, the group that says no, that compliance team, or those geeks we have but don't actually understand or trust. Not only are our adversaries nipping at our heels with every new defense or protection technique and tool that is put in place, or even policy disseminated, but we still have more put upon us by those same leaders. Those folks reading some article or hearing something from a peer or wondering, oh my God, are we protected from that? We are then told to go hunt down a solution to that problem, even if it's not a problem or threat that directly applies to us in our environment. In the public sector, often it's a matter of trying to be the agency that does not show up in the Washington Post or the subject of the Government Accountability Office report or even call to the Hill to answer some questions from Congress critters, who may actually know less about technology they are assigned to oversee than maybe your own parents' and grandparents' knowledge and awareness combined. Also, looking back, as we become more comfortable in having gotten this far, either in charge of a team or doing some epic red team activity or diving each day into a pile of malware or massive DFIR assignment, we see a parade of folks coming in with an arm's length collection of certifications and degrees. Or conversely, with a bunch of papers or talks in their CVs that indicate that they appear to be a specialist in some obscure, nuanced security technique that is going to be useful in your organization, if you just find a way to exploit it. So, how can we balance this? Do we need to sacrifice the things that give us an interest in our jobs and are the ones that get us out of bed each day? Are we deriving meaning from these challenges? Can we pace ourselves to keep us ahead of danger? Can we keep the pace so that everybody arrives where they need to be safely? So this was the nugget that gave birth to this talk. Last summer at DEF CON 25, and yes, a security conference sold, it's well beyond the drinking age itself, and has counted B-sides as an offspring. A friend of mine's son was giving a presentation of a tool he authored along with my friend's colleague. So let that sink in a little bit. His son. Now, both of us weren't and still aren't that old, I think. But essentially having a teenager speak and demo at what was, and I still believe is, one of the premier security conferences in the world still just blew my mind. I'm here, they're here, as are about 30,000 others, some noobs, some mid-career professionals, and some old hackers, as the self-medication may suggest. So in the words of David Byrne, how did we get here? So reading the news, which is increasingly arriving in digital forms and ever more sensationalized forms from InfoSec Twitter, yeah, it's a thing, or via dropping into any con, B-sides, makerspace, boardroom, or even average workplace, there's a reason the merit badge for dumpster fire is here on the slide. News of the daily data breach, the next big old vulnerability, vendor acquisition, or divestiture, or lest we forget our nation-state threats and their successes, depending on who you want to believe. In the last week, we can count on the AMD vulnerability and the revelations of the Cambridge Analytica and Facebook issues just as such an item. So this is a real thing. So many take the announcement of breaches, they look to see who's implicated, comment on their educational background, or their experience, and wring some hands, and by the time we'd like to see a post-mortem, regulation, or some action that doesn't directly involve shareholders, we're already in the next alley over with more gasoline and matches and warming our well-wrung hands on the next incident. It's a never-ending stream of this, or that or another. We stood too close to that dumpster fire, we'd sure light our own hair ablaze. In many cases, for the times we've gotten to dig deeper, either via mea culpa by the organization or a particular journalist digging for more of the story, insider information, or just general sleuthing, we realize more often than not it's just the failure to do the very basics. So why have orgs and their staff skipped addressing the basics? Isn't this the first thing they teach you as a CISP or a CISA or system certification training to look out for? Is not looking at the OWASP and SANS top 20 list a good start? Are we full of offices of paper tigers? What are we actively doing each day to answer the question, what have I done to make my organization more secure? And I can sort of relate, given that when I got my first professional full-time security title to my name, I was drinking from the fire hose. We had a department lead, a policy and audit person, and two of us assigned to security engineering for a Fortune 125 critical infrastructure company. While there was a security team that was eventually rolled into ours from the regulated utility side, they were far from the highly technical types you typically have filling these same seats nowadays. Everything was in startup mode, getting network monitoring in place, engineering endpoint protection, developing incident response activities, developing and adapting policies, and so forth. This was my first big rodeo, although I'd done bits and pieces unofficially before and on my own time, and this was actually far from my last one. As a builder, it's something I reveled in for many years. Eventually, burnout makes it around. Maybe too many multi-day responses, forensicating things one cannot unsee, or just basic alert fatigue, or maybe the worst of all, the desire to actually be management. That latter portion is one of those branching functions many of us start to encounter after a while, with maybe a few of the former influencing that decision and later path altering. So, where's the cavalry at this point? We aren't getting younger and we haven't mastered cloning. What does that leave us? Convert those in place? There's only so much pirating of staff elsewhere in the organization. There's also potentially farm leaguing other staff, developing rotations and other opportunities. But there's got to be more to it. This is the only time I will directly address diversity, but it touches not only the first item in tech where folks bring up diversity, which will say a few things about gender and race. The other is potentially looking at sources of skills, diverse ideas, techniques, and approaches out of the typical expected STEM or tech pipeline. In a recent discussion among my public sector peers, we noted that some of our strongest candidates came from non-traditional sources, or at this point, potentially never had a touch of tech before getting into security. While at CERT-CC, supporting the Department of Defense, I had suggested to improve the quality of our intel was to pull people from the University of Maryland's journalism school to sit with our technical analyst. The analysts learn how to dig and write for a story and investigation, and the journalists learn the tech skills. Generally, it's a win-win and force multiplier by bringing up a non-traditional but useful skill set. So are we also seeing this non-traditional sourcing looking to start viewing InfoSec as an apprenticeship, like a tradesman or skilled labor? This is a technique that's still widely used in Europe and elsewhere, and poo-pooed in a vocational technology and community college environment here in the States. We've probably moved to over-professionalize our career to the point where success and skill are marked more by degrees, certifications, and other academic achievements rather than plucking folks from a CTF, forensics challenge, or other hands-on activity that provided a live, tactile demonstration of skill. I think there's a role to keep some of the career academic and theoretical. That's fine. But as mentioned earlier, pulling in somebody with a demonstrable tech skills and teaching them security also falls along these lines. Things they should be doing in already or have some experience is just their daily practice of their occupations and has an element of security already potentially baked in. So now that we have this whole pipeline thing sorted out, how do we apply them to our functions and ensure they feel developed and want to stick around? That whole retention problem. If anything, I think security has more churn than IT in general. It may be burnout, it may be the wrong people in the wrong career, or just a charlatan or just feeling a sense of being overwhelmed. So how do we ensure some level of professional development, and where do we help them assess where they want to go? Ops, development, forensics, DFIR, policy, audit, and, well, maybe even management. Can we identify this early on or allow for some level of exploration? It's generally how we came to it, but have we nurtured this through our own educational infrastructure? I highly doubt primary and secondary schools nowadays get to foment this desire to explore within a career space, when much is being taught to standardized tests and meeting some arbitrary score. Potentially leveraging a basic digital literacy education, much like many of us had to take home economics or woodshop or drafting, can not only help those see this as a career, but also stave off bad digital citizenry when such technology is handed to a layperson. This is definitely an avenue for exploration. Next, another hard part is trying to convince companies and leadership that your average computer security professional is a day-to-day or even an hour-to-hour learner, and treating their educational and information needs the same way a more staid career, say like an accountant, is rather disingenuous. Your training budget for your or any career should not be the first thing that gets sacrificed in any budget negotiations. If anything, if you're in a position of leadership, you should fight for this almost as much as the tools used to keep your infrastructure running. It's not just blinky lights and hardware to keep your organization running, but also the people. And those investments are to be treated the same or even better. You can't capitalize the people the way you can hardware. You can stave off their depreciation by appreciating their professional needs. And I will reiterate that again and again. If you are limited, you can get creative about training. Train the trainer, do it online, on-site, and free skills development options are good for the financial and travel constrained. However, for some of the better bang, yes, conferences, much like this one, are worthwhile for networking and idea sharing. The single most useful thing to our careers is information and knowledge sharing, and much of what I'm attempting to do now is the same thing. We learn new techniques, test theories, see demos, and it can foster a nugget of an idea into something clever and effective if given the right medium to grow. The other question after a certain time is, are you ready to lead? For many, that's a tough question. It's not merely a question of management or not, because you can manage a process and you can manage people. For technical routes, it's often the process. The technical lead is usually awarded to those who define themselves as being somebody who can be managed to trust to perform their duties in a fashion that others should emulate. Lead by example. I believe one of our issues are in this approach. We often saddle these same individual technicians with trying to manage people and the team structure and the function. Traditionally, many of us aren't exactly great at any of those individually, and even are less properly trained to do so, especially given our focus on honing technical skills to do a combination of all of those. A good technician does not beget a good actual manager. So we've addressed the people part, but what are some of our other pitfalls? There's tons of stupid launched in the world every single day. Some of this has been around for a bit, that long tail of technical security debt. Things like vulnerabilities and such have existed in the code base for several major releases or ingrained in immutable firmware on silicon for years as part of an architecture decision. Those can potentially begin to be eliminated as these processes for subsequent development to integrate security into their processes and life cycles. This is having security at the table even at the ideation moment, well before development begins. Our other issues stem from folks rushing into a niche or an unregulated environment with an idea to be first to market with a solution, often looking for a problem. This has been seen much with the ride-sharing or gig economy companies. I think IoT and cryptocurrencies are another example. While revolutionary and disruptive, how much of this has actually improved our living society and culture? Maybe it has for a small few, but it's been far from something ubiquitous. With their rapid adoption and very little rigor, and in many cases a standard for interoperation and management was developed, it has added to a complexity to our ability to find ways to protect and secure it. With early IoT, or Internet of Things, it was just a market with no standards, so the potential attack surfaces were and still are remarkably broad. How much old stuff before all this, some basic standards were agreed upon, are we still now in use? Who is in charge of deprecating it? Is there a EULA in place for how long some of this can be used before an upgrade is required? Was it even designed to be upgraded and maintained? Or is it some gray area between bleeding edge first adopter tech debt and commodity where we have this murky area of incentive to replace or fix? I still wonder why some things need to be connected to the network, let alone the internet. I will never buy an internet-connected toilet. Sorry, not open for any level of discussion here. We've heard that while those who haven't jumped onto the cryptocurrency bandwagon are now trying to find ways to extract the ledger component, the blockchain, from the architecture and repurpose it elsewhere. Sadly, it's now being applied to everything. It's the buzzwords that become its own joke. Even having some companies in non-traditional industries rebrand themselves to get in on the show, like Long Island Blockchain Company from Long Island Tea. This type of stuff is not a blanket to cover a complete idea, but more of a pointed application of a technique. But many have and still will, like many hot new things, consider it a solve-all. How does this adapt to our problems and pitfalls statement? Well, one of our biggest problems is subjecting ourselves to the flash and bang of the next great thing. Promises of a cure-all to all your security ills if you buy the next blinking box, or add this new thing onto your suite or your endpoint, or this policy auditor technique, whatever, are just as much a threat than a nation state, industrial espionage, or even insider threat. Just the addition of new doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be better. Often you are losing valuable time, expending resources, and probably even duplicating processes and techniques you already have been applying that haven't actually been related properly to the folks writing the checks or making those procurement decisions. Again, this is an evaluation of, have we adequately addressed the basics? Are those processes solid, foundational, and can we expand on those for other activities? A good foundation makes incident response or forensics easier, net defense easier, policy application enforcement easier, and auditing easier and streamlined. When these decisions for purchases are measured and aligned with what may already be in place, you've actually overcome most of the major problems and challenges I've seen in my time in the public and private sectors. For some tools, yes, having an overlap or duplication is warranted, a trust but verify model, but it doesn't always need to be the new cool tool, which can be accomplished by tweaking something you may already be doing or have. You've been born into this, raised up, grown and married into the family, Now you've maybe fallen out of love with your career, met the crazy uncle, or decided that this marriage is too much and you feel you need to find an exit. For many, and this has gone under the study by a number of individuals and teams, that burnout is a real thing in our career space. It can arise from abandoning a line of specialty within a career or to exiting the career entirely, or in some extreme cases, those stresses have resulted in much, much worse. I've had friends of friends who have taken their own lives. Unknown how much of their chosen career and level of stress and other issues at work may have contributed. But there are things we can do that can take a severe mental, emotional, and physical toll on us if we aren't self-aware. There are at least 3 or 4 times of myself I was considering leaving this actual career path. However, for me, I've chosen to balance it with some diversions and other items to even it out. But there are many other things that can't be handled by diversions. It could be mental health, emotional attachment, family life, disenchantment, and disillusionment. Or just say, hey, I feel like I want to do something else. Much like I've proposed bringing in non-traditional hires into the sphere, the same goes for us to go and pollinate other careers, industries, and areas. There are a number of career lines that could learn from our skills and experience, and oddly, the legal professions are the first ones that come to mind. Along with public service, either as a candidate, in some cases providing counsel and support to offices and elected officials. This could be a real way to bridge going from a technical or operational role into something such as policy. It doesn't require a step in management or giving up a lot of the hard inner experience of technical security skills. It will, however, require developing some soft skills such as communications. Less directly, I've known those who have changed these careers completely, saying becoming a chef, a photographer, or something else where they really don't utilize much of the old skill set they've built up and are entirely happy. I had thought of owning a restaurant and brewery, but that was a way before the explosions that we've seen in the last decade. Says a bit about how long I've thought of an exit. Regardless, you have to think about this and this being an end-all, be-all career. Even sometimes you are not just lured into the challenge, but saw this as a potential lucrative career financially. If more of the latter, that motivation alone will not make what we do as fulfilling. Plus, I'm still looking for my Lamborghini and Bugatti money. So what am I to do? Frog left, bear right. For me, I got lucky. At least that's what I like to tell myself. I find myself right now at what I think would be the pinnacle of a career a number of years before I thought to be able to be considered where I am. I had to make a few of these branching decisions several times since 2010, both in my personal life and professionally, and they need to be taken seriously. This is where a measured approach can help. Granted, this is coming from somebody with a baker's dozen of employers since they graduated college. I actually planned this from somewhere midway in my college time, noting that the other students wanted to head directly into consulting after my first college major change versus my own concept of starting out as a junior engineer or analyst and learning the ropes so that at some point as I would progress up the ladder, I would be done the same work of those people I may end up actually leading. My phrase was, I'll run interference with management if you tell me what you are doing. I will translate that into something that they are asking for in an honest way and you can go about doing your work. I was always going to be eventually a tech translator, using metaphors and analogies to explain concepts to this and topics to this day. However, I now do it with straight up humor and a liberal use of movie and pop culture quotes and references. For the record, Ghostbusters is the movie that keeps on giving. Personally, now I wonder, how did I, a techie, end up in CIO land, even when I had planned to get into some other level of management? I'm not doing as much hands-on playing around as I like. I've limited my compile times and lab work to other harder topics, but I'm not afraid of a terminal window or in command prompt. I'm left doing HR and professional development, planning for my staff, working through budgets, liaison with areas of our own organization, as well as speaking with my peers in my own agency throughout the government. It's more people work than anything, and advice for the introverts like myself, it's taxing if you don't approach it correctly. Know what you may want to get yourself into, but it can too be very rewarding because these are often the steps I wish my bosses and leaders had done for me. To others who are looking to promote your stellar candidates, consider what they want. Ask what their own plans are, what they like to do, and so forth. Offer up rotation opportunities that offer no consequence. This is essentially apprenticing by acting in a role. Oddly, something that occurs quite regularly in the public sector, especially during an administration change. Developing that map for your career needs to begin early isn't set in stone. Always be ready to come back and refresh that plan once folks get a chance to explore and be developed. How many of you are actually where you'd set out to be? Probably not a lot of you. So, we are to the crystal ball point in this talk. We've touched on starting out, moving forward, assessing where we are, hiring and development, and what to do with this fighting force of amazing magnitude we've compiled. As I noted earlier, we need to get our fundamentals straight and functioning. Just this past week, I was sitting in on our CIO council meeting at HHS, and this concept was once again echoed by our own agency's CIO. And it was the first thing I asked of our new CIO and deputy CIO when they started during a town hall when I was at Interior. When I was in charge of the IT environment at Mandiant I was focusing on stabilizing what was there and refining what we had into something that was manageable and repeatable. It was also the fact that I was an IT department of 1 with a ratio of 65-1 for supporting a 24/7 operation. If you are the lone person or the linchpin, make sure it's easy to maintain and can be easy communicable on how to operate it in case you get hit by the proverbial bus. And those from the DC area know that this is actually a real possibility in our own transit system. I noted how we tend to chase the new hot thing, that cyber brass ring. It is like the security version of cornering the market in Dogecoin, trying to grab the value of something that's unproven and may end up being just a joke. It's a fear of missing out, or FOMO, of trying to tamp down the next hot vulnerability and buy the next glossy blinky box or pull in the next slick consultant to rebrand a Nessus scan and say it's a full pen test. In short, our careers have focused more on covering our own proverbial asses and less on being actually proactive in a measured and understandable way. Do your due diligence. You can still adapt and move fast in a prescribed and managed level of risk, especially if you are confident in your foundations and basics are covered. Those are your best mitigations. Sadly, I feel a lot will go and wonder if they have a DeLorean parked out back with Mr. Fusion installed, so they can go back and shore up their organization infrastructure back when the times were a bit easier and things were much more manageable. While that's never really honestly going to be the case, you can still break the bigger problems down into smaller chunks of processes, essentially bringing an agile methodology for processing your technical and policy backlog of security work. That's really your adaptability to get out of having to support things such as DevSecOps. Make your activities atomic and you can process the work better. Better way to manage your workloads and interactions with other parts of your organization you support. Right now, it seems to become very vogue to try to force multiply by finding and addressing the vulnerabilities through administering bug bounties. While that whole process and execution is enough for another talk and definitely handled better by others such as Katie Masouris, looking at new ways to try to identify and triage ways to fix that security and risk debt is something truly transformative. And over the past few years, that's gaining some steam. It's not for everybody, but much like those seeking out certain medications advertised on TV, consult your CISO or CIO or doctor about starting such treatment for your environment. So we're here, not just as a meeting of career professionals, but as this is my first time here, like other security cons, large and small, it's more like a community. In some cases, like communities, families are built. We are, some to our own admission, a very strange group. While we have our own specialties, we also are unique and bring that uniqueness to the community. In some cases, good or bad, that diversity of yourself and others is what can enrich the community as well overall. We also have the issues with the crazy uncle or weird aunt, or in some personalities there's summer trouble, and in some cases there's the occasional missing stare. The latter has come more to light given the Me Too movement. Thankfully, when following the latter over the past year, our own community has been doing a relatively better job of self-policing and isolation of those than others. Granted, not all gatherings attract the same types of people of the community. There are types of folks who head to a Gartner conference or RSA versus those that head to Black Hat, or those that handled the DEF CON, Chaos Communications Congress, and those that are in more regional conferences such as Tor, Derby, Hope, Shmoo, and even those B-sides I talked about earlier. The phrase last year when we looked back at 25 years of DEF CON was that B-sides Vegas is what DEF CON was 10 years ago. DEF CON is what Black Hat was 10 years ago, and Black Hat is what RSAC was 10 years ago. I feel RSAC has now just become a vendor pitch deck on steroids and an excuse to drink and party. And see, it's come full circle, just the quality of the dress has got more professional and the drinks become more expensive. One of the outcomes of this maturity and eventual strain from serving the community it was born out of was seeing that the only woman that was offered up as a keynote this year, Monica Lewinsky. Senior security folks in the Bay Area and elsewhere decided to sort of do a B-sides to RSAC and create our SAC to bring in more diverse speakers that RSAC seemingly ignored. This is a sense of the community admirably self-correcting. The picture on the slide here is sort of reflective of this community as well. Not sure how many folks got the story of the show, but like any long-running TV show, people kind of come and go. For a good run, you have the core group of folks. Some leave, it changes into something else. Older blood retires and moves on, and slightly less older blood sticks around, soldiering on and with some other replacement cast, integrating them in and riffing off their ideas and getting them into more part of the show. Sometimes it does take a few leaders to step aside, say those who are generally professional thought leaders, and let some of the developing talent, or some who are already great already, to shine brighter. We can see that in the past few years, as those for which some of that early research or techniques were based on get new folks to build and expand upon them. This doesn't discount anybody's relevancy, but like music pioneers, other folks can take things in a whole new direction, riff on them, and expose to other audiences. And those folks taking those ideas back and getting them to work on in their situations and environments and problems. This diagram here is an abridged writing aid for the hero's journey, the quest or call to adventure, and what path and trials they must face to complete the cycle and return. So this one here, oddly enough, if we'd like to go on pop culture references, is the same one used by the writers for Rick and Morty. However, this really sums up your standard InfoSec professional from the early 1990s to today. Every day is a hero's quest, and I don't mean the old Sierra video game. When we walk into the office each day, or home office, or coffee shop, or nowadays just at home. Each new day provides us with a call to adventure, that things that keeps us getting out of bed each morning, no matter how long it takes for our feet to reach the floor. We reach for our aid, our tools and techniques, and start our journey into the unknown, with the guardians who are the folks that will begin to pile on the reasons and content of the work. Your challenges set out are what new hell is on your network or on your client's network, or some policy or law that is now needed to be translated, reported on, and enforced, or some other incident to recover from. So much like Frodo, you can pull along your team, have your own Samwise, potentially briefed by your boss, potentially your grizzled old CISO, hopefully not known as Gandalf, and on to do some incident handling and some basic forensics. At some point, you'll have to call upon others of your organization, maybe an outside call to a consultant or a malware specialist as you dive into the depths of despair of your 24th, 28th, 48th, 72nd straight hours of response action, desperately losing hope as logs start to point nowhere and your adversary appears to move laterally hard. Suddenly, the malware analysis comes back, somebody finds a backup tape or other media to do a diff on, or when some hunt operations, you start to gain ground and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Possibly, leadership decides to exercise some of their budget and get some outside help, but only enough that you can stop wearing 2 of the 10 hats you currently do. You find out your enterprise admin used his daughter's middle name and birthday as a password for their account. Apologize to those feathers you ruffled while doing the response. Thank the sysadmins for their help in pulling data. You bring your report to the boardroom to explain, and while it may not be your role or job, it's suggested that some new policies and controls be put into place, and potentially several people should have their account access downgraded, or possibly just as many asked to leave the organization. And finally, upon cleanup and after action report has been delivered, maybe you get an award for having spent so many hours after your regular schedule, and including those weekends you explained to your spouse you wouldn't be a regular occurrence, but actually have become. You make it back to your desk, home, or loved ones, sit down for a strong adult beverage, and potentially a few well-deserved hours of shut-eye. It's Monday now. It's time to start all over again. Or as I noted earlier, face your burnout and find something else that isn't prematurely aging you or creating that shoulder and back arch required of many years of poor chair posture and typing. But hey, we love what we do we not? Even if we eventually get that nickname of Igor for that neck hump. Again, we are here because we have a sense of purpose. We've grown up and lived this life willingly. So are we the giving tree or the boy in Shel Silverstein's story at this point? Who was the mentor, that guide? Who was that Gandalf when we got started and ushered us along this path? Were they willingly giving of themselves, imparting knowledge, expertise, help and guidance, nurturing your own development and asking very little in return? How are you if the boy in seeking those gifts? Did you consume selfishly, only coming back when in need? Or did you carefully select what you wanted and ask of your mentors and guides? I think one of the things great about who we are is that we should, if things work correctly, be going through this cycle regularly to enrich and give out and share those gifts and talents we have. However, those who come to us shouldn't just take. They should realize that there's a finite supply of anything from us. Don't let somebody claim us, but suggest or tell them to diversify their quest for knowledge. Send them to a conference or two. Point them to a meetup or a user group, or perhaps maybe encourage them to volunteer and give back. Again, there's a balance to find and strike. So this goes back to this inspiration, seeing a friend's son provide his demonstration of his tool and technique at DEF CON. He was not just leaning on his father, but getting help and knowledge from others to refine his work, and then taking a good chunk out of what would be a simpler summer vacation, sharing that work with his now peers, ensuring that this is a renewable resource. This is one of the ambiguities that Shell left in his story, but we can understand some level of resource conservation and the ecology that makes up our profession. It's built on people, personalities, and knowledge, the constant curious hero's quest. This isn't going to survive as merely a money-making operation in this digital age. We are the resources that are protecting it from collapse and destruction. Many would like to see it that way, but I think folks that are attracted to this life and stay are cut from a unique cloth. We've gotten here. We are that fork in the road, on our Triumph motorcycle, where the tree stands, deciding to go either down that muddy path, challenging as it is, but at the end, following that journey is the community, or that shorter path, dry but with a few dumpsters starting to smoke, lighting the way. It's never going to be an easy decision, but we've gotten just so far. It's up to you to find the way forward. Thank you.